FBI. Oh, no. No, don't do this to me. Chapter 8. I groaned and gently set down Jamila, as if we had been doing something wrong instead of something very right. All the good feelings inside me evaporated in a hurry, just like that. Wham, bam. I needed a break, and this wasn't going to be it. "I'm Agent Jean Matthews. This is Agent John Thompson," the woman said, gesturing at a 30-something blonde guy munching a Ghirardelli chocolate bar. "We hate to interrupt, to intrude, but we were sent out here to meet your plane." "You're Alex Cross, sir?" she said, finally thinking to check. "I'm Alex Cross. This is Inspector Hughes from the SFPD. You can talk in front of her," I said. Agent Matthews shook her head. "No, sir. I'm afraid I can't." Jamila patted my arm. "It's okay." She walked away, leaving me with the two agents, which was the opposite of what I wanted to happen. I wanted them to walk away. Far, far away. "What's this about?" I asked Agent Matthews. I already knew it was something bad, which was an ongoing problem with my current job. FBI Director Burns had my schedule and itinerary at all times, even when I was off duty, which effectively meant that I was never off duty. "As I said, sir, we were told to meet you, then to put you right on a plane to Nevada. There's an emergency out there. A small town was bombed. Well, the town was blown off the map. The director wants you on the scene like an hour ago. It's a terrible disaster." I was shaking my head, feeling incredible disappointment and frustration as I walked over to where Jamila stood. I felt as if there was a hole in the center of my chest. "There's been a bombing in Nevada. They say it's on the news. I have to go out there," I told her. "I'll try to get back as soon as I can." "I'm sorry." "You have no idea how sorry I am." The look on her face said it all. "I understand," she said. "Of course I understand. You have to go. Come back if you can." I tried to hug her, but Jamila backed away, finally giving me a small, sad wave. Then she turned and left without saying another word. And I think I knew that I had just lost her, too. Chapter 9. I was on the move, but the whole scene felt more than frustrating. It was actually surreal. I flew by private jet from San Francisco to a place called Wells, Nevada, and from there caught a ride in an FBI helicopter to what had once been Sunrise Valley. I was trying not to think about little Alex, trying not to think about Jamila, but so far it wasn't working. Maybe once I got to the bomb site? Once I was there in the action, in the middle of the shit. I could tell by the way the local agents deferred to and fussed around me that my reputation, or the fact that I worked out of Washington, was making them nervous and edgy. Director Burns had made it clear that I was one of the Bureau's troubleshooters, that I was his troubleshooter. I wouldn't carry tales back to Washington, but the agents in the field offices didn't know that. How could they? The helicopter ride from Wells to the bombing site took only about 10 minutes. From the air, I could see emergency lights all around Sunrise Valley, or what had been Sunrise Valley. The town was gone now. There was still smoke, but no fire was visible from the air, possibly because there was nothing left to burn. It was a little past 8 o'clock. What the hell had happened out here? And why would somebody go to the trouble of destroying a hole-in-the-wall town like Sunrise Valley? I had been briefed as soon as I stepped inside the FBI helicopter. Unfortunately, there wasn't too much information available. At 4 that afternoon, the residents, except for one male who'd been shot, had been evacuated by what appeared to be U.S. Army National Guardsmen. The townspeople were then driven 40 miles away to a point halfway to the nearest large town, Elko. Their location was called into the Nevada State Police. By the time the troopers arrived to assist the badly frightened townies, the Army trucks and jeeps were gone. And so was the town of Sunrise Valley. Blown off the map. I mean, there was nothing down there but sand and scrub. I could see fire trucks, vans, off-road vehicles, maybe half a dozen helicopters. As our copter began to settle down, I spotted techies in chemical protective overgarments. Jesus, what happened here? Chemical warfare? War? Is that a possibility? In this day and age? Of course it is. Chapter 10. It was probably the scariest thing I'd ever seen in my years as a police officer. Total desolation, without apparent rhyme or reason. As soon as we touched down and I climbed out of the helicopter, I was outfitted in chemical protective overgarments, CPOGs, including a gas mask and other gear. The rubber mask was state-of-the-art, with dual eyepieces and an internal drinking tube for replenishing fluids. I felt like a character in a scary Philip K. Dick story. But it didn't last too long. I took the unwieldy mask off as soon as I saw a couple of Army officers roaming around without theirs. We got a possible break soon after I arrived. A couple of rock climbers had spotted a man using a video camera to film the explosion. He looked suspicious, and one of the climbers had photographed the man with his digital camera. The climbers also had shots of the town's evacuation. 2 of our agents were interviewing the climbers, and I also wanted to talk to them as soon as the agents had finished. Unfortunately, the local police had gotten to the camera first and were holding it until their chief arrived at the scene. He was late because he'd been away on a hunting trip. When the chief finally got there in an old black Dodge Polaris, I was all over him. I started talking before he had even climbed out of his car. "Chief, your men are holding important evidence. We need to see it," I said, not raising my voice at the 60-ish pot-bellied man, but making sure he got the point. "This is a federal investigation now. I'm here representing both the FBI and Homeland Security. We've lost valuable time because of your men." To his credit, the police chief himself was exasperated. He began yelling at his officers. "Bring the evidence over here, you morons! What the hell are you two trying to pull? What were you thinking? Do you think? Bring the evidence!" His men came running, and the taller of the two, who I later learned was the chief's son-in-law, handed over the camera. It was a Canon power shot, and I knew how to get at the pictures. So what do we have here? The first shots were well-composed nature photos. No people in any of them. Close-ups and wide-angle shots. Then came pictures of the actual evacuation. Unbelievable. Then I finally got my first look at the man who had filmed the explosion. His back was to the camera. At first he was standing, but in the next few shots he was down on one knee, probably to get a better angle. I don't know what had prompted the rock climber to take the initial few shots, but his instincts were pretty good. The mystery man was videotaping the deserted town. Then, suddenly it went up in flames that rose several hundred feet high. It seemed pretty clear that he had known about the attack before it happened. The next photograph showed the man turning in the direction of the climbers. He actually began to walk toward them, or so it appeared on film. I wondered if he'd spotted one of them taking his picture. He seemed to be looking their way. That was when I saw his face, and I couldn't believe what I was looking at. I recognized him. And why not? I'd been chasing him for years. He was wanted for more than a dozen murders here and in Europe. He was a vicious psychopath, one of the worst of his kind still on the loose anywhere in the world. His name was Jeffrey Schaefer, but I knew him better as the Weasel. What was he doing here? Chapter 11. There were a couple more crystal-clear shots as the hateful Weasel got closer to the photographer. Just the sight of him sent my brain reeling, and I felt a little sick. My mouth was dry, and I kept licking my lips. What is Schaefer doing here? What connection does he have to the bomb that leveled this small town? It was crazy. Felt like a dream, completely unreal. I'd first come across Colonel Jeffrey Schaefer in Washington 3 years ago. He'd murdered more than a dozen people there, though we could never prove it. He would pose as a cab driver, usually in Southeast, where I lived. The prey was easy to grab, and he knew D.C. police investigations weren't as thorough when the victims were poor and black. Schaefer also had a day job. He was an Army colonel working inside the British Embassy. On the face of it, he couldn't have been more respectable. And yet he was a horrible murderer, one of the worst pattern killers I'd ever come across. A local agent named Fred Wade joined me near the helicopter I'd come in on. I was still studying the climber's photos. Wade told me he wanted to know what was going on, and I couldn't blame him. So did I. The man who videotaped the explosion is named Jeffrey Schaefer, I told Wade. I know him. He committed several murders in D.C. when I was a homicide detective there. The last we heard of him, he'd fled to London. He murdered his wife in front of their children in a London market. Then he disappeared. Well, I guess he's back. I have no idea why, but it makes my head hurt just to think about it. I took out my cell phone and put in a call to Washington. As I described what I'd discovered, I was reviewing the last few photographs taken of Colonel Schaefer. In one of the photos, he was climbing into a red Ford Bronco. The next was a rear shot of the Bronco as it rode away. Jesus. The license plate was visible. And that was the strangest thing of all so far. The Weasel had made a mistake. The Weasel I'd known didn't make them. So maybe it wasn't a mistake after all. Maybe it was part of a plan. Chapter 12.
The Wolf was still in Los Angeles, but reports were coming in from the Nevada desert on a regular basis. Police arriving near Sunrise Valley, then helicopters, the U.S. Army, finally the FBI. His old friend Alex Cross was out there now, too. Good for Alex Cross. What a good soldier. Nobody understanding a goddamn thing, of course. No coherent theory about what had happened in the desert. How could there be? It was chaos, and that was the beauty of it. Nothing scared people more than what they didn't understand. Case in point, a local LA hotshit named Fyodor Abramstov and his wife Liza. Fyodor wanted to be a big mafia gangster, but also lead the life of a movie star type in Beverly Hills. This was Fyodor and Liza's house that he was staying in now, but really, the Wolf thought of it as his house. After all, their money was his money. Without him, they were nothing but small-time punks with big ambitions. Fyodor and Liza hadn't even known he was at their house. The couple had been at their place in Aspen and finally got back to L.A. at just past 10 that evening. Imagine their surprise. A powerful-looking man sitting by himself in the living room, just sitting there, so peaceful, rhythmically squeezing a rubber ball in his right hand. They had never seen him before.
"Who the hell are you?" demanded Liza. "What are you doing here?"
The Wolf spread his arms. "I am the one who gave you all of this